August 12, 1942. A basement room in Berlin, windowless, lit by a single bulb that swung slightly whenever footsteps crossed the floor above. Cato Bontjes van Beek sat with her hands flat on the table, palms down, and watched the Gestapo officer flip through a stack of leaflets, her leaflets. She could still see the faint gray smudge of charcoal dust along the edge of her right thumb. It had been there for days now, stubborn, a mark she had stopped trying to scrub away. The officer looked up, his eyes narrowed with something that might have been curiosity or contempt. He asked her if she understood what she had done. She said she did. She was 21 years old. This is the story of Cato Bontjes van Beek, a young German woman who chose conscience over country, art over silence, and paid the steepest price imaginable. She was not a soldier, not a spy in the cinematic sense, but a ceramic artist and courier who moved through Nazi Germany with banned literature in her bag, and a belief that beauty and truth could not be extinguished by terror. Her name is not inscribed on monuments. Her face does not appear in the standard histories of the war. She was one of the few Germans who stood openly against the regime that claimed to speak for her, and she was executed for it before her 23rd birthday. Cato grew up in the village of Fischerhude, near Bremen, in a household that felt more like an artist's commune than a traditional German home. Her father, Jan Bontjes van Beek, was a Dutch-born potter and painter. Her mother, Olga, was a writer and pacifist. The house smelled of wet clay and wood smoke. There were always visiting painters, poets, intellectuals, people who believed in questions rather than answers. Cato learned to sketch before she learned to read. She drew the reeds along the riverbank, the sagging rooflines of barns, the hands of old fishermen. She had a quiet intensity, a way of looking at the world that made ordinary things seem worth preserving. By the time she was a teenager, that world was collapsing. Hitler rose to power in 19... Books were burned. Artists were labeled degenerate. Her father's studio, once a place of open conversation, became a space where people whispered. Cato watched neighbors she had known her entire life begin to wear swastikas, to salute, to inform. She watched the country she loved become a place she no longer recognized. She enrolled at the School of Applied Arts in Berlin in 1938, ostensibly to study ceramics. But Berlin was not Fischerhude. It was the capital of a state that demanded total allegiance. Cato found herself moving in circles where dissent still flickered. Students, theater people, leftists who had not yet been arrested. She listened more than she spoke. She had learned early that silence could be a form of survival, but also that silence could become complicity. Her charcoal-stained fingers became a kind of signature. Friends joked that she was always drawing, always working, always leaving smudges on cafe tables and train tickets. She did not tell them that some of those tickets were not for art supplies. By 1941, she had made contact with members of the Red Orchestra, a loose network of anti-Nazi resistors that included communists, intellectuals, and artists. The name Red Orchestra was coined by the Gestapo, a mocking reference to the Soviet radio transmitters some members used. But the network was more than a single ideology. It was a collection of people who believed that Hitler's war was a moral catastrophe and that doing nothing was itself a crime. Cato became a courier. She carried leaflets, underground newspapers, messages between cells. She moved through checkpoints with a calm that bordered on recklessness. She was young, blonde, well-spoken, a girl who looked like the regime's ideal daughter. No one suspected her. She hid radios behind canvases in her apartment. She memorized routes, drop points, contact names. She learned to read the streets, to recognize when someone was being followed, to vanish into crowds. She did all of this while continuing to attend classes, to sculpt, to pretend that her life was ordinary. The work was exhausting. Not the physical labor, though that was real, but the constant performance of normalcy. She had to smile at her professors, to nod when someone praised the Führer, to pretend she was not terrified every time she left her apartment with banned material in her bag. She thought often of her mother's pacifism, her father's quiet defiance. She thought of the reeds along the riverbank in Fischerhude, bending but not breaking. One afternoon in the spring of 1942, she was handed a stack of leaflets that included excerpts from Allied radio broadcasts and anti-Nazi essays. The paper was cheap, the ink still smelled fresh. She folded them into her satchel, walked to the train station, and boarded a train to Hamburg. She sat in a second-class compartment, her hands in her lap, charcoal dust still visible on her thumb. A Wehrmacht officer sat across from her. He asked her if she was traveling for work. She said yes, she was visiting a gallery. He smiled, wished her well, got off at the next stop. She distributed the leaflets in 3 different neighborhoods that night. She left them in telephone booths, tucked between books in public libraries, slipped under the windshield wipers of parked cars. She did not know if anyone would read them. She did not know if they would make any difference. But she believed that silence was surrender, and she could not live with that. By mid-1942, the Gestapo had begun to close in on the Red Orchestra. Arrests came in waves, members disappeared overnight. Cato's contacts grew more cautious, then more desperate. She knew the net was tightening. She did not run. That choice would haunt the people who loved her. On the morning of September 20, 1942, the Gestapo came to her apartment. They found the radio. They found the leaflets. They found the list of names she had been too slow to destroy. She was taken to Gestapo headquarters on Prince Albrechtstrasse, the building where so many others had vanished. She was interrogated for hours, then days. She did not give up the names of her comrades. She admitted to distributing anti-Nazi material. She said she had done it because she believed it was right. The interrogators seemed almost puzzled by her calm. They were used to people who begged, who collapsed, who tried to bargain. Cato did not beg. She told them, with a clarity that unnerved even the stenographer, that the regime was built on lies and that terror could not last forever. She said these things knowing they would be used against her. She said them anyway. She was transferred to the women's prison at Alexanderplatz, then later to Plötzensee. The cells were narrow, cold, lit by a single bulb that never went out. She was allowed to write letters. Her family saved them. In those letters she did not rage or despair. She wrote about small things, the quality of the light through the cell window, a book she had been allowed to read, a memory of her father's studio. She wrote that she had no regrets. She wrote that she hoped her death might mean something. Her trial took place in December 1942, before the notorious People's Court presided over by Roland Freisler, a judge who treated treason trials as theater. Cato was one of several Red Orchestra members tried that day. Freisler shouted, interrupted, mocked. Cato stood in the defendant's dock and spoke in a voice that did not waver. She said she had acted according to her conscience. She said the war was a crime. She said she would do it again. Freisler sentenced her to death. She was executed by guillotine on August 5, 1943, at Plötzensee prison in Berlin. She was 22 years old. Her last letter, written the night before, was addressed to her parents. She told them she was not afraid. She told them to remember her as she had been. Someone who loved beauty, who believed in kindness, who could not stand by while others suffered. She asked them to forgive her for the pain she had caused. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave. The Nazi state wanted her erased. After the war, her family worked to preserve her memory. Her letters were published. A few scholars began to write about the Red Orchestra, though the network's communist ties made it a politically complicated subject during the Cold War. In West Germany, resistance to Hitler was often framed as the work of military officers or aristocrats, people who looked respectable, who had not collaborated with the Soviet Union. People like Cato, young and idealistic and left-leaning, were harder to canonize. It took decades. In 1984, a street in Berlin was named after her. In 1999, a memorial plaque was placed at her family home in Fischerhude. In 2009, a German television documentary told her story to a wider audience. But even now, her name is known to relatively few outside of Germany. She is one of thousands, perhaps millions of people, whose defiance was quiet, whose courage was not recorded in the moment, whose stories were nearly lost. Her mother, Olga, lived until 90. She spent much of her later life speaking to schoolchildren about Cato, about the cost of silence, about the small acts of resistance that add up to something larger. She always ended her talks the same way. She would hold up one of Cato's sketches, a simple drawing of a tree, branches bare, roots deep, and say that this was what her daughter had believed in, that even in winter, roots hold, that beauty and conscience could outlast terror. The charcoal smudges on those sketches have faded now, softened by time, but the lines remain clear. Cato Bontjes van Beek was not a perfect person. She was not a saint. She was a young woman who loved art, who loved her family, who made a choice that most people never have to make. She chose to resist a regime that had the power to destroy her, and it did. But it could not erase the fact that she had resisted. It could not erase the leaflets she had carried, the radios she had hidden, the words she had spoken in a courtroom designed to silence her. She believed that one person could make a difference, even if that difference was only to say, clearly and without apology, that certain things are wrong. She believed that bearing witness mattered, even when the witness is alone. She believed that silence, in the face of atrocity, is its own kind of violence. She was right. Today her face appears in a few history books, usually in a footnote or a sidebar. There is a small monument in Fischerhude. There are the letters preserved in archives, written in a careful hand that still bears the faint marks of charcoal dust. And there are the people who remember her, fewer each year, but not yet none, who tell her story to their children, who say her name aloud, who refuse to let her be forgotten, because forgetting is what the executioners wanted, And in the end, the only way to resist that erasure is to remember. How many other lives like hers were quietly buried in unmarked graves,